Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today we have some news out of the state of New Hampshire where Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar is visiting New Hampshire this week, or yes, now would probably be last week by the time we're seeing this, and supporting a U.S. Representative running for Senate, Democrat Chris Pappas. So in an article from WMUR and its political director Adam Sexton, the article begins by saying that Senator Amy Klobuchar is returning to New Hampshire. The Minnesota Democrat canceled her prior scheduled visit to the Granite State in June following a pair of politically motivated shootings in her home state of Minnesota. The June 14th attack targeted local lawmakers and resulted in the unfortunate death of one of Klobuchar's close friends and allies, State Representative Melissa Hortman. On this rescheduled visit, Klobuchar is going to campaign for U.S. Senate candidate Chris Pappas, making stops in Cheshire County on Friday, July 11th. So this would already have passed by the time you're reading this. I'm excited to come to New Hampshire to help my friend Chris campaign for this key Senate seat because he is someone who gets things done and we need more elected officials who will focus on improving the lives of the American people. He will do that, Klobuchar said. Senator Klobuchar is familiar with the territory here, both political and geographic, following her 2020 presidential campaign. As a candidate, she also hiked past Monadnock in 2019. So that's what's interesting here. There's two parts of this. For one, talking about the 2026 U.S. Senate race. Well, first we could do that very briefly here. And the Senate race in New Hampshire is going to be an open race. Democratic Senator Jeanne Shaheen is retiring. Chris Pappas is the only Democrat in the race, and he'll be facing off likely against Republican and former Massachusetts Senator Scott Brown. This is expected to be a very, very close race, one of the closest Senate races in the state of New Hampshire since 2016, where Maggie Hassan defeated Kelly Ayotte by under 1% of the vote. This is expected to be the closest Senate race since then. Inside Elections has as a battleground. Cook Politico, Sabato Crystal Ball both have it as lean for the Democrats. Race to the White House has it as tilt Democrat. There hasn't been any polling between Brown and Pappas yet, but the Shaheen-Brown poll showed Shaheen leading by 10 points. But again, there hasn't been much to take away in that regard. But the Senate election in New Hampshire, Jeanne Shaheen won by 15 points back in 2020. Maggie Hassan defeated Dawn Bolduc by 9.1% in 2022. But in 2016, Hassan only defeated Ayotte by 0.14%, and in 2014, the Republican midterm year, Shaheen only defeated Brown by 3.2%, only 2 years after he lost to Elizabeth Warren in the Massachusetts Senate race by 7.5%. So New Hampshire is going to be very close and something very important to watch for on the Senate level for 2026 as well. But this also starts the conversation that's certainly going to come out of the state of New Hampshire with Democratic Senator Amy Klobuchar. Amy Klobuchar is listed on the Wikipedia page as one of several potential Democratic candidates. She's not among the 7 that have expressed interest or so as much as some of the others have, but Klobuchar did say back in May that the Democratic Party should not rule out having a female as the 2028 Democratic nominee, potentially hinting at her running for president again in 2028. And it wouldn't be much of a surprise because Klobuchar did run for president in 2020 and didn't actually do that bad in some of their early results in the states. First, it's important to mention that in 2024, Klobuchar won re-election as U.S. Senator from Minnesota by over 15 points on the same ballot when Kamala Harris and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz only won the state at the presidential level by under 5%. So Klobuchar is a bit of an electoral juggernaut in the state of Minnesota. And she would, as a Midwestern senator, I'm sure, love to translate that into a presidential run in 2028. It's also worth noting that what the Democrats decide to do with the 2028 Democratic primary cycle is very much still up in the air. For a very long time, the Iowa caucus happened when first, and then New Hampshire was the first in the nation presidential primary for the Democratic side. In 2024, the Democrats ended up changing that. A large reason being that President Biden did not perform well at all in the 2020 Democratic presidential primary in New Hampshire, and the President Biden and his allies shifted it so South Carolina ended up going first, a state that Biden did very well. The Democratic primary cycle is now very up in the air for 2028, and we're a long ways away from knowing how that's going to play out. But it is possible that Iowa and New Hampshire could end up going the first caucus and the first primary again. So this could be an indication of Amy Klobuchar going up to New Hampshire and starting to lay those roots for a potential 2028 campaign. Now, it's worth noting in the early 2028 hypothetical polling, Amy Klobuchar's name has not come up in most of these polls. And if it has, she hasn't had much support, if any, so far. But in most cases, she hasn't been included in these polls. And So things are kind of interesting for Klobuchar for 2028. She isn't talked about as much as some of the other candidates, like former VP Kamala Harris, fellow 2020 candidate Pete Buttigieg, California Governor Gavin Newsom, New York Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, fellow 2020 candidate Cory Booker, Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, and Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota. Well, also 2020 Democratic candidates as well in the Democratic primary, like Elizabeth Warren as a potential candidate as well. As for how Klobuchar's campaign went, you may remember that she dropped out on March 2nd, 2020, along kind of on the same time as Pete Buttigieg did, where Buttigieg dropped out on March 1st and endorsed Joe Biden, and then on March 2nd, Amy Klobuchar dropped out and endorsed Joe Biden as well. And then Michael Bloomberg on March 4th also endorsed Biden. So 3 of the more middle-of-the-road establishment Democrats at the time dropped out of the race and then threw their support behind Biden, I believe right before Super Tuesday, and that gave Biden a very big boost, where Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren kind of got caught flat-footed. They split the vote of the more farther left vote in a lot of cases, and Biden won most of the establishment, moderate vote, and then Biden became the presumptive Democratic nominee from that point on. But in the first few contests in Iowa, for instance, Pete Buttigieg and Bernie Sanders came very close in the percentage of votes here, Buttigieg getting 26.2%, Sanders 26.1%, Warren finished in 3rd, Biden in 4th, Klobuchar finished in 5th by 12.3%. She did get 1 delegate out of Iowa. But in New Hampshire, Klobuchar actually did much better. Bernie Sanders, neighboring senator from the state of Vermont, ended up winning with 25.6%. Buttigieg finished in 2nd, another place he put a lot of time and attention into and a lot of early grassroots support. Buttigieg got up to 24.3%. But this time around, Amy Klobuchar finished in 3rd at 19.7%. And this is a state where she announced, I believe, her campaign in New Hampshire, 19.7%. She made New Hampshire a very important early part of her Democratic primary campaign, even beating out Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren, which also neighbors New Hampshire, and Joe Biden, who put up a abysmal showing in the state of New Hampshire. As well, also, it's worth noting that Tulsi Gabbard, who got 3.3%, also put all of her campaign eggs in New Hampshire and put a lot of her attention on the state. Amy Klobuchar went with a very similar strategy and finished in 3rd place at 19.7%. Now, obviously, Klobuchar putting all of her attention and money on New Hampshire and only getting 3rd place was not the big enough showing she needed to continue on with the campaign and win any more delegates in a meaningful way to become the Democratic nominee, but it showed that 19.7% of New Hampshire Democrats did support her. And going into 2028, it's possible with her on the ballot again that she may still have a good number of that support going into this election. Now, in 2028, unless something out of left field happens, we know Bernie Sanders will not be running again. But we know Pete Buttigieg probably will be. So we could see Buttigieg and Klobuchar on the ballot again. Warren could run again. Really not much indication if she will or won't at this time. Biden, we know, won't. Tom Steyer probably won't. Tulsi Gabbard won't. Andrew Yang probably won't either. But it's going to be an open race in 2028 and a new race. But Klobuchar, being one of the top 3 vote getters in 2020, running again in 2028 along with Buttigieg, could set them up for a highly contentious New Hampshire primary if New Hampshire does end up being one of the first 3 contests again. So it's very interesting looking at the potential for 2028 as we're still a very long ways away from that. And in the early polling aggregates for the Democratic primary, Klobuchar's name is nowhere near the top in most of these polls. So far, it's been either Kamala Harris in 1st place or Pete Buttigieg, usually behind in 2nd, and then Gavin Newsom and AOC kind of fighting it out for 3rd and 4th place right now. Klobuchar's name is not near the top, but having run in 2020 and putting up a decent showing in New Hampshire before, it's interesting that she's campaigning with Senator Chris Pappas, or with U.S. Representative Chris Pappas trying to become Senator Chris Pappas in anticipation of a potential 2028 Democratic bid. And you never know. Sometimes it works out if Pappas ends up winning the Senate race. Maybe early on, Klobuchar announces a presidential bid. Maybe Pappas gives also that support out to Klobuchar, endorsing her in that election as sort of a thank you for helping with the Senate campaign. These kind of things could happen in presidential politics, and they have in the past. So it's an interesting conversation. 2028 is still a long while away. The 2026 New Hampshire Senate race isn't even set in stone yet between Pappas or Brown. Either one of them could win, so we have to wait and see how that all plays out. But it's a very interesting conversation to start thinking about a little bit for 2028. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did. Leave a comment below, tell me your thoughts and any questions you have about this video or this topic or any other you'd like to see me address. Thank you so much for watching. Again, please remember to hit like and subscribe, and I hope to see you in a future video.